What is up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel. I've got a big Masters Challenge format rules document update to kind of run through. But first, what is the Masters Challenge format? If you're unfamiliar, this is something I've been working on for a little while here. You can see a bunch of the other videos on the channel, but the idea is to create a Commander-like format from Magic the Gathering, but into the Pokemon TCG game. So this is basically a rule set that is trying to adapt those two things. We're going to go through deck construction. We're going to actually go through what my ideas for playing a multiplayer game of Pokemon TCG is going to be like. And we're going to kind of run through all that stuff. I have the initial rules video that kind of explains everything. But since then, I've gone through and updated a bunch of things and been a bit more specific with some stuff like that. So starting off, constructing a deck. The first thing you do is select a partner Pokemon, obviously just like from the Pokedex, whichever one that you want. Let's say, for example, Grimer over here. And then you pick two different printed copies of it. So for example, here we've got the most recent printing of Grimer, I think, on the right, and a slightly older one, and they are both different typing. What this means is that is the two typings that you are allowed to have of Pokemon in your deck. So if you had two Psychic type Grimers, you could only have Psychic type Pokemon, but having a Dark type Grimer means we can have both Psychic, both Dark, which is kind of cool, right? That gives you some deck building constraints when it comes to what you're going to put in that kind of stuff. The other thing is that the partner Pokemon that you select starts in the active spot every single game. But because you have two of them, you get to pick which one is the one that's going to start in the active. The other one gets shuffled into your deck. So you have some versatility. Some partner Pokemon, you're going to always just want to have the same one in the active. For example, I'm playing Greninja in one of my decks, and Radiant Greninja is the one that's pretty much always going to be in the active because it's really great to help you get set up. And so then there's a lot of different rules as to how you can select your partner Pokemon. Basically, for example, Alolan Grimer is considered a completely different Pokemon from Grimer. So you can't have Alolan Grimer and regular Grimer, Cantonian Grimer, I think it is, because their evolutionary trees are different. Whereas something like Pikachu and Alolan Raichu, so it's just regular Pikachu, right? So it's a little bit confusing, but that's kind of how it has to go. We also have stuff like each unknown letter counts as a different unique Pokemon. All of them are always just named unknown, but there's like 28, I think, maybe more, versions of them. So it's like if you actually wanted to play a full unknown deck, you can. Why not, right? Instead of, because a lot of the unknowns have an ability that requires you to have more than one. Instead of none of them being viable, it's more fun to say yes, you can do that. It's probably bad, but the point is that this is supposed to be a fun, casual format. So we're trying to say yes to things that encourage fun and no to things that discourage fun. But we're also still trying to operate within the 100 card single turn. You know, everything is built around what your partner Pokemon is. Because we're trying to keep that identity of the, hey, look, I'm this trainer, this is my signature partner Pokemon, like, you know, Ash and Pikachu, Brock and Onix kind of a thing, and then kind of build around that as for your deck, which I really like. But here's another example. This is one of the first decks that I built, which was Gengar. So you get to play the Dark type Gengar V, and then put Gengar VMAX in the deck. And then tag team Pokemon count as all of the Pokemon listed at once. So you can have Gengar and Mimikyu as a Gengar, basically. And I could also have Gengar and Mimikyu as a Mimikyu, and then my other partner could be a Mimikyu. So tag team gives you some cool options and helps you get into some colors that those Pokemon would not ordinarily. For example, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres. It's probably the wrong order, but has a card that's a tag team together, and that means that you can play that colorless card, that tag team one, with Fire for Moltres to like get access to that color, and the same for Articuno and Zapdos, which is pretty good and gives you a lot of flexibility. So definitely had to kind of say yes to that. And this is where some of the new stuff comes in, and where it starts to get a little complicated. Now, the whole idea is that you can only use each Pokedex numbered Pokemon once. And then there has to be some exceptions for viability, right? Like I said before, the Unknown rule, let's just pretend they're all unique and different. In Gen 2, Unknown had its own Pokedex, which trying to collect the different letters anyway, so it makes sense for that to be the case. But there's an exception for regional variants, so you could have Grimer and a Alolan Grimer in your deck. Which is fine, like the evolutionary trees are separate and distinct, that's okay. I could have Raichu and a Alolan Raichu in my deck, that's fine, stuff like that. But I have to be mindful that they will both evolve from Pikachu, so I need to be picking between them in the game when I'm actually playing. Now, here comes another awkward thing. Mega, VMAX, V-Star, Break, and Level X, which we're going to call Ultra Forms from now on. Now, an Ultra Form is something that evolves from itself. If you have a look here at the example, Greninja Break evolves from Greninja. So it's not a new and separate different Pokemon. It's still Greninja, but it adds this new cool thing, or it's like a Mega, or the VMAX, it gets really big, or whatever, right? If we're using specifically the Pokedex numbered Pokemon rule, none of these cards are playable because all of them evolve into the exact same Pokemon. So in that scenario, it's like, what? We want these cards to be playable. A lot of them are the reason why, like Dialga V-Star, you would never play Dialga V. You want Dialga V-Star, that's the good one, right? So the goal is that these are considered different Pokemon for the one named Pokemon rule. But V, EX, EX, Shining, Radiant, and Shiny, which is Almond Star, are not considered separate different Pokemon. So for example, I can't have Greninja Star and Greninja EX in my deck, but I could have Radiant Greninja and Greninja Break in my deck. I could also have Greninja VMAX. I think we have Greninja VMAX. A Level X Greninja or whatever, right? But I can pick one. I only get one Ultra Form for each Pokemon. I can't have a VMAX and a V-Star. I can't have a VMAX and a Break, for example. That's just basically what it says here. So you get one of each Pokemon in the evolutionary line, right? So I get like Froakie, and then we kind of go up to Greninja, and then we go, okay, I can have a Greninja Break, I can have a Greninja VMAX, Level X, whatever, and you kind of pick how you want to do it, which I think kind of is fine, that's the other thing. So I can have Radiant Greninja and Shiny Greninja as my partner Pokemon, which means I would technically have two Greninjas in my deck, but that's how a partner Pokemon works. But then I could also have Greninja Break in my deck, which is pretty much one of the decks that I have built, so just kind of like use that one as an example. But that was kind of the idea, all right? And this is basically just the explanation that I just did. But additionally, when one of these Ultra Form Pokemon specify a Pokemon, it can be any of the listed Pokemon. For example, this Miss Mage's Level X is Miss Mage's GL. And it specifies it must go onto a Miss Mage's GL. And how many of these things are playable? Like how many Pokemon V are playable other than just for catching a VMAX or a V-Star? And so for the MCF, you can actually place any of those ones and you just ignore the title so that it can evolve into an Ultra Form. So any Miss Mages could become Miss Mage's Level X. Any Greninja could become Greninja Break. So I can put my Greninja Break onto my Radiant Greninja, which is kind of strong, but it means that it's playable rather than not playable, and that's kind of the thing that we're going for here. You could also put Greninja VMAX onto Radiant Greninja, right? All of these things are fine. And it's also not insane compared to something like Cube, where any water Pokemon evolves into any water Pokemon. This is still slightly more sensible than that, but gives you some cool ideas, right? Like you could have the whole, one of the ones that I was looking at was Inteleon. So you get the whole Shady Dealings line of Inteleon, and then you evolve it into Inteleon VMAX, where it can like actually start doing damage with its ability, and then scoop up the whole thing and start again, which is kind of cool. It gives you a bit more flexibility with the Pokemon listed, and it means that you're not trapped with the original design. Because a lot of the older ones, sometimes like the Mega is kind of relevant, but has just been crept out. It's like no longer ever going to be relevant. It's not going to have enough HP or do enough damage to be any good. But paired with something before it, or like it becomes an upgrade, like a Ninetales break, for example, turns a support Ninetales that draws you cards into an attacker that can do some okay damage. And the idea is to like, how can we make more things playable rather than for them to sit in obscurity forever? So I'm pretty happy with how this works. I think this is fine. One of the exceptions is a tag team Pokemon cannot evolve into an Ultra form. The example that I had was Arceus Dialga Palkia ADP cannot evolve into Arceus V-Star because Arceus V-Star specifies Arceus, not ADP. But it's like one of the downsides of playing a tag team Pokemon, but again, whatever. And if you have a tag team Pokemon in your deck, then it counts as all of the listed Pokemon. So if I had Gengar and Mimikyu in my deck, I could not have a Gengar or a Mimikyu in my deck. But like that's, you pick in the strong tag team Pokemon, that's the cost. The other thing is that V-Union and Pokemon Legend are considered multiple parts of the same single Pokemon. So you can have the 4 cards that make Greninja V-Union, that's fine. But it means that you can't do that and have Radiant Greninja. Same with Mewtwo, Morpeko. You can't then just have like a single card version of it as well, because that counts as your one Pokedex one, but you're getting 4 cards for it. So same thing with Legend. And then next is a harder one. Magic the Gathering does this really well, where it's more consistent with older cards. But Pokemon Power Creep, when it reprints stuff with the same name, it's supposed to be technically the same card. And like Magic does the same thing as well, right? It's never going to reprint something with the same name and have a different effect. Pokemon does this all the time, and a lot of the time it is consistent. But for example, a whole bunch of the balls changed at one point, and they introduced Nest Ball, and Nest Ball was an effect they didn't have, but then Great Ball and Ultra Ball changed, I think it was, or something like that. A couple of them changed randomly. So whenever you're using cards, especially old cards, the most recent printing by name is that card's effect. So even if you put this old computer search into your deck, then it's going to be an A spec. It will be your only A spec, and it will be the computer search. This is more from like preventing people going, oh, I want a computer search. I'll play the old one and then I'll go and get a different A spec. The whole idea is that you can use this cool old bling cards. The point was that you're allowed to play old cards, but not in a way that gives you niche advantage for, you know, against other players who are less researched. So that I think was a really obvious example because it was something that existed before, and they reprinted it to make it more balanced by making it an A spec. Because it's a singleton format, we don't care so much about the A spec rule and you not being able to have multiple copies of computer search, but not having other A specs, like you can't have computer search and prime catcher, I think is kind of relevant and is kind of the fun of deck building. And then the next one is another similar problem, right? We have 100 cards that's Professor something and has the same effect. And so for this, they are all just considered Professor's Research, because every Professor's Research would be like, this is Professor's Research and it's Professor Turo or whatever, like the actual person's name. And in that way, they always share the subtitle, and it's just all been grouped together in Professor's Research. So in that way, all of these old cards, Professor Oak, Sycamore, Juniper, are all considered Professor's Research. It's the same one card, which I think just stops you from having 15 cards that say discard your hand, draw 7, which is a level of consistency that is a bit above what we're looking for, which is kind of crazy. But then likewise, some of the really, really older cards have actually been errated to be supporter before the supporter card type existed. So like, I think Imposter Oak is just says trainer, you know, like Classic Build just says trainer. These are supporters, and will be treated as supporters. Previously on the channel, I've gone through the full list of potential 2-color partner Pokemon, both for expanded and eternal. My current preference is that this format should be eternal. Going and using all of the old cards doesn't get you that many crazy things. It's like not broken. None of the Pokemon are actually that playable, and then just some of the items are good, not like cracked, right? So I think it's kind of fine to play eternal, but if your playgroup wants to be specifically playing with guaranteed real cards that they own all the time while it costs us a thing, you can just play expanded. That's fine. That's something you'll have to agree with people, you know, kind of as it happens. But we also recommend using something like Limitless, where you can print out the proxies and sleeve up cards that play with that way, because a lot of the older Pokemon cards are going to be harder to get and are like really expensive for no reason sometimes. But that's, you know, I wanted to create an allowance for that so people could choose and do it that way. And a lot of GLC people are very invested in just that kind of expanded format. That's pretty much it. Same as the Ace Spec rules, which we covered before. Another thing, a Pokemon Mega evolving shouldn't end your turn. There's no Mega Evolution Pokemon that is good. Like, you couldn't take any Mega Pokemon into Standard right now and be good in the format. And so for it to end your turn, that seems terrible. And we're just gonna be like, look, just don't. Yeah, just forget about that. Happy to skip on that rule. And then the other thing is that these 3 cards, Drops in the Ocean, Scorching Charcoal, and Sunseed, are not legal in any format for Pokemon TCG, but they were printed in the Pokemon Collectors thing, or what, I can't remember what it's called. And they're literally not even listed on Limitless, so you can't actually print these out as proxies either, which is kind of weird. But there's no reason why they shouldn't be playable. I actually have some here. Here's my Drops in the Ocean. So it is a real thing that exists. It doesn't have like a crazy card back or anything. I just happened to trade for these, and when I looked it up, it was like, this is illegal in every format. I'm like, that's a bit crazy. I know it's 100 extra damage, but that's still not that insane. And because the goal of this is to be a multiplayer format, if you throw something on the board that is gigantic and a huge problem, the other player's responsibility is to deal with you instead of letting you win the game. So I don't think anything like this is too crazy. And if anything, it just makes some Charizards playable, some Blastoises playable. Like Radiant Blastoise is a bit actually playable. And so I feel like for this casual format, you should actually be saying yes to these kind of things. And so I think these should be illegal. But now let's talk about multiplayer PTCG. This is updated a little bit since we last talked about this when I went through the rules. The main thing is prize bargaining, and I'll kind of get to that in a second. The whole idea is that the mulligan is different. So in the MCF format, you start off with your partner Pokemon in the active. So you're not doing a classic Pokemon mulligan looking for a basic Pokemon to start the game with. You're just kind of looking for consistency cards to help you set up and get some of those, draw kind of ability Pokemon and stuff happening. So we're doing a partial Paris, which is you look at your 7, you put some cards back, you draw a replacement, and then you shuffle the ones you put down into your deck, which is like the classic Commander Mulligan. And I think it works really well here. We've played a couple games testing this kind of thing out, and it seems to work every time. You'll get some starting Pokemon, you go, okay, look, these are the basics I need to get, or this is the basics I have, I need to go and find the Evos for this. And it kind of works pretty well. And the main thing that multiplayer needs adjusted is how the first and second turn goes. In classic Pokemon, person that goes first can't play supporters, cannot attack. And then the second person can do those things. But if there's 4 people in the game, the first person can't play supporters or attack, and then 3 other people can, that's a bit rough. That hurts a bit. So the player going first can play support on their first turn. The first player may attack on their first turn. Any attacks done on each player's first turn have all damage and effects prevented when interacting with an opponent. So if you have something like the most recent Comfey, I think it's SCR Comfey, that just says each player draws 3 cards. You will draw 3 cards. No one else will draw 3 cards. That's probably the most busted version of this. But there's a few things that are like a call for family. There's like 100 Pokemon with call for family. It means that if you're going first, you can call for family, which is pretty good. And do stuff like technical machine evolution and things like that that can help you set up a board state, and you're not relying on it going second as like a catch-up thing. But Pokemon still need to be in play for a whole turn to evolve, including the partner Pokemon. And then any effects of supporters that would impact an opponent on each player's first turn do not. So basically, each person gets one first turn where there's like no hostilities whatsoever. And when it comes back to the very first player's turn, everyone kind of comes online and can start interacting and doing a lot more stuff. It gives everyone an opportunity to try to get set up and do a little bit, because the idea is to be playing the game. Pokemon TCG has this problem where you can just not hit card draw, you can just not set up, and you just kind of sit in there waiting. I played a game yesterday. I went to my locals and played like the standard format. My opponent opened Lumini on V and just kind of did nothing. He's like, I didn't draw any trainer cards. All I had was like stage 2s and stuff. And the game forces him into that state because that's the mulligan he has to accept because it has a basic in it. And then he says no action, so he's just sitting there watching me play the game. And I'm trying to avoid that for the MCF format. So allowing people this grace. I can't come in and knock out something that you've got. Like your partner's not going to die immediately before you even get a turn, and that kind of stuff, which is kind of good. It means you can play, a partner Pokemon that relies on an evolutionary tree. For example, I have a Pidgey deck where if Pidgey gets knocked out, that's kind of annoying because I would like to be able to make a Pidgey or EX and then retreat and then make an attacker or whatever. And so a lot of this kind of stuff is to create more fairer circumstances for lots of different types of players to get an opportunity to set up and do something before people start attacking and negotiating about what stuff's going to happen. And speaking of negotiating, let's talk about prize bargaining. So one of the interesting things about Commander for Magic the Gathering is that something will happen and a player will go, this thing that's happening is very bad for me. Can I do something to help you if you can stop it for me or whatever? Like there's a lot of negotiation that goes on. Some people will very clearly identify themselves as a target that needs to be dealt with. And you go, okay, fellas, how do we stop this guy winning the game? Or how do we stop this guy doing this big crazy thing that's going to be a big problem? And a lot of that negotiation comes down to, how can we trade resources? How can we do things that help each other? Pokemon TCG doesn't have a lot of those kind of things built in. However, we can share prize cards. So if somebody makes a big VMAX, they go, here's my 330 HP, EX or VMAX or whatever. And you go, okay, I can't knock this out, but I can do half. If on your turn, you can attack, deal the other half, and get the KO, let's share the prizes. And we'll go half and half or whatever. Or you can take 2 and I can take 1, depending on what it is. And then you go, cool, deal accepted, and then we kind of run through the motions, we make that happen. Which means that you can bargain with essentially what is points in the game, scoring prizes with other people. And I think this will make things really interesting. And I'm excited to see how that kind of goes. I haven't really had much opportunity for this to happen just yet. But I think this is a good way to encourage people to have opportunity to do stuff like that. And then the reason why I have this Dusclops here is that if you're forfeiting a prize, Dusclops is an example, Electro GX is an example. We have a Surging Sparks Magneton coming up that is an example that knocks themselves out and gives upside. For example, with the Dusclops, you can put the 5 damage counters on any way you like, any of your opponent's Pokemon. Then you have to select a player to receive a prize. So this is another good way to do prize bartering, because you can go, okay, this guy is very far in front. I can't give him prizes. You're kind of far behind. I'm going to give you the prize while I put 5 damage counters on the guy that's in front, his scary threat Pokemon. And I think that is another cool way to give people opportunity to potentially work together. Okay, now... just a few last little bits and then we'll get into the ban list. But if you ever play a card that specifies opponent or opponents, you specify a player. For example, Roxanne says the player that your opponent has to have a certain number of prize cards. That means that you could only specify people that meet that criteria. For example, Iono is not going to be everyone. It's just going to be you pick one guy. And in that, you're going to be choosing those kind of things. And it's always one opponent. Everything is always going to be one opponent. Some cards just get like way too insane otherwise. Stuff like Pakivista or Raikou that count the number of benched Pokemon, yours and opponents, is going to be like, okay, sick, I'm just going to attack you for 400 for 2 lightning energy. And that's not the idea here. The idea is that you're measuring against a specific opponent. So Raikou goes, okay, that guy's only got 1 benchy. I'm going to do heaps less damage and it's not going to be a knockout. Or this other dude's got a stack bench. I'm going to attack into there. That's going to do more damage and is going to get me the KO. And that's where I want to be, focusing and sending that kind of energy. Where it's like each one is an individual match between people. It's just happening simultaneously in the way that the game tracks for opponents. Because there's not really anything that works super great in multiplayer. And so finding a way to make that happen is kind of the goal. I think this works well enough. Some cards are going to be janked and you're going to have to kind of make a choice. And that's kind of the space that we live in, unfortunately. And then the last thing, anything that references the checkup or in between turns step. For example, Frostlass. We have a Frostlass in standard at the moment, which puts 1 damage counter on everything with an ability in between turns. Now, in a 4-player game where there's like 1 from player 1 to player 2, 1 from player 2 to player 3, 3 to 4, and then 4 to 1, we're going to have 4 checkup steps. Frostlass is going to do so much more work. And instead, and like poison and stuff as well, right? Poison's going to do a million things because it hits 4 times before it's your turn again. That's kind of brutal. Imagine 2 plays with Hisui and Sneasler or something, and you get poisoned, you just die for free, no attack. Kind of crazy. So the idea is that the only checkup step that you care about is the one where it becomes your turn and when it leaves your turn. So the Frostlass player, when it becomes their turn, Frostlass activates. When it leaves their turn, Frostlass activates. When it is the other players, end and start, you don't care. I think that's the best way to kind of balance that. Same with burn, same with poison. I'm only going to take poison on becoming my turn and leaving my turn, and that's all I have to worry about. But let's talk about the ban list. I looked at the GLC format ban list as kind of a template to get started with this. I looked at every single one of the cards on there, and I go, none of these are relevant. The main one, like Lyssandra's trump card, is great. You're going to shuffle 40 cards back into your deck. That's nice. It doesn't actually stop anything. You can't really force an endless battle, and you can't really lock players out if there's 2 other dickheads on the table that are going to come and get you for it. So instead, we looked at banning stuff that just says no to everyone. Like this Vileplume is a great example. Just no one can play item cards. That sounds dreadful. I don't want to be playing in that. Imagine, and again, I know I'm going to be talking about Magic Commander a lot, but it's because that's the template from what this format is. If you play something that's like no one can play instants or no one can play sorceries or something like that, everyone's just like, okay, I'm just sitting here, I guess. I'm waiting for that to go away before I can play the game again. Same for any specific type. It's kind of lame. So the idea was to remove anything that prevents you from playing items, prevents you from playing supporters, and prevents you from activating Pokemon abilities. Because most of the card draw on the format is going to be from Pokemon abilities. So a lot of this stuff is kind of like that. This is all items. Some of these are supporters. Klefki for abilities. Because it's like, well, if I can't draw cards, I'm going to be sitting here doing nothing. And we really want to avoid sitting here doing nothing. It's supposed to be a fun format. So if we're going to be brutalizing everyone, Chorus is the only real exception of that. Chorus just draws too many cards because it's like 10. And this is a format where it's really easy to fill up your bench. So it's just like every single deck will be playing Chorus, and every opportunity that you have to search for something where you're just drawing cards is Chorus. I'm like, well, for now, let's put that on the ban list. Maybe we come back and remove it later if it gets less crazy. But Professor's research says 7, and you have to discard cards for that cost. Chorus shuffles it back into the deck, and then you've got 3 other people to pick from to find 5 bench things to then draw 10. So like, oh, I'll get rid of that. Loot Surge's strategy. Originally, I was like, this card is fine. And then I started looking at things. I'm like, actually, actually, maybe not. Actually, this is kind of crazy. And so it's ended up on here as well. And then this is all just from expanded. And these are the ones that I found so far in Eternal. And I'll be slowly adding stuff that kind of fits in these categories as they come along. And if you see stuff that's not on here and does belong on here, please put in the comments, let me know. I don't know every Pokemon card. I don't, but I'm going through and I'm looking and I'm finding stuff. And when I'm cooking and I'm looking at things, I'm trying to find these kind of cards to put on this list. Spiritomb in particular is especially feral because you can start as your partner Pokemon, and it just says no one can play trainer cards. So you can't play supporters, you can't play items, you can't play stadiums. And it starts the game in the active spot. Yeah, that sounds like a really fun game. My deck is just going to be Spiritomb and 99 Darkness Energy, and I'll win the game 10 damage at a time. It just seems really bad. Really unfun time. But that's basically what I explain here. And then again, another shout out to the Limitless's proxy printer function. And then that's kind of it. The final notes is really just like, hey, look, I want this to be fun. I want people to be able to play this, use cool old cards from formats long gone, and get to play with their favorite Pokemon, and brew and construct a lot of cool stuff. And that's kind of the idea. I want this to be a cool casual format that you play before the locals or whatever, while you're just hanging out with some friends. And I think so far in what I've played so far, it works. It's been pretty chill. It's been a lot of fun. I built a couple decks for it, and I'm gonna make another video in a minute where I'll go through some of them to help give you some ideas. But it's, the whole point is for it to be goofy and fun. So hopefully, if you're trying this out for yourself, you are also going to have some goofy fun. But stick around. I'm going to be posting some deck lists and deck check kind of stuff that I've been building, get you an idea of what stuff in this format kind of looks like. It's a lot of cards that say search your deck for a card, I promise. The classic. And stick around a bit. Maybe hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and check out some of the other stuff that's upcoming from the Masters Challenge format. And hopefully I'll see you around.